Hi again. So it's storytelling hour, but real stories that are unreal. Growing up, uh, there was a whole mythos in my family about UFOs and extraterrestrials. Now I know they're in the news all the time now, and there's even promised disclosure. But let's say, as far as I can remember, there were stories about sightings. Um, for example, before I was born in 1969, the year man walked on the moon, my parents reported seeing a cigar-shaped object over their house or around the vicinity in River Road, Kelmscott, which is part of the Armidale-Kelmscott district. There were a series of sightings in that day or week, Armidale Hills sightings. My mum was very much intrigued, and this was before I was born, but I remember having it related to me for years afterwards. My older brother was asleep. It was 6:30, I think, at the sound of the milkman. My dad and then my mum went out and saw this thing hovering. Couldn't have been a plane, apparently. Um, and then the whole kind of extraterrestrial thing and UFO stuff took on a new dimension, let's say, and there was a lot circulating within New Age culture, even in the 70s, well, maybe especially in the 70s, about these things. There was a book by Stan Deo called The Cosmic Conspiracy. There was a copy of that in our house. My mum was kind of drawn into hippie things, which my dad really poo-pooed. She was into yoga as well. She was sort of into anything that she decided was spiritual. I can remember, oh my goodness, I mean, the Aetherius Society. Uh, I'll put some links down below. I never attended any of their meetings. My mum may have attended a few. Some of the influences came by way of my auntie, um, who was in the Theosophy Society. For example, her idea through Theosophy of ascended masters, Jesus Christ being one of them, Gandhi, and who knows not what else, right? And that through practices one could approximate or even become an ascended master. Now, we all know about UFO religions as well. The Raelians kind of being the most colourful example. Not so much within popular culture right now, but they were in the early 2000s. My mum wasn't tapping into that, but obviously UFO religions are not unknown. Think of Heaven's Gate. That ended very tragically. But my mum had her own version of these things, and a lot of it was precipitated or spearheaded by my brother's death. You know, so that little kid who wished that his parents had woken him up around 6:30 in 1969 so that he could see this craft was spitting chips when he couldn't. And he himself got drawn into the whole kind of popular culture stuff around UFOs. My mum claims that before she died, that, or maybe even afterwards, that she found photographs, not photographs, would that it were, she found drawings of intricate designs of propulsion systems and elaborate flying saucers that my brother had drawn. Such was the intensity of his interest. And, you know, my brother was into sci-fi. He was still alive to see Alien and I imagine Close Encounters of the First Kind. So it was in the culture more generally. But subsequent to his death, Mum also claimed that she had found a sheet and showed it to us of him writing down things in an alien alphabet. More on that later, but needless to say, it coalesced after his death into this belief system that my mum had that we somehow were the chosen children. We were special, that she had a connection to the divine. She believed in reincarnation, and she explained my brother's death, saying that he had been taken deliberately because he was a reincarnation of Thomas Alva Edison and an expert in electricity. He was one of some kind of council of 12, or could it have been 11, I don't know. But there was a whole kind of council of individuals that represented kind of these properties, he being the Lord of Electricity, and who else sat on that council as also being responsible for the different elements, I guess, or technologies. So according to her account, he hadn't died but ascended, instead was taken, so that he could prepare for the second coming, which was going to occur in 1992. So you have to understand that through the 80s, this is when the stories emerged, after my parents' divorce as well. She became more and more kind of ensconced in this mythology that she elaborated on. And she sort of had women friends who were into alternative culture, and she would share some of this with her women friends, and they would listen on intently because they saw Joe as a very spiritual person. But for me, as a young person, I was confused, and I thought, why is my mum telling these stories? Why can't she just face up to the fact that my brother died? And also, it distorted the death, and it didn't really allow for a grief process in our family. I'm not saying this to pathologize my mum or air dirty family laundry, but I am saying that it created a very, very, very strange childhood and a warped sense of what mortality meant, a weird sense of the shape of things to come, a grandiose idea of her importance, our importance, and my brother's importance, because the ship or spaceship that he was supposed to be steering with Jesus upon his return, she even called the Foxfire, which is actually a kind of Native American plant, as far as I know, that glows and in the dark, and or has phosphorescence, and is in desert regions. Maybe even among the Navajo people, or in the Nevada desert. I don't know. I never really knew where she got that name from, but I did look it up after. So there was a real grandiosity behind her beliefs of us being special, singled out, my brother having a mission, thus explaining his departure. And the year 1992 loomed very large, with my siblings getting into my teens and mid-teens, and they becoming older as well, because I'm the second youngest. With my sisters in particular, we'd have these conversations, because Mum would sometimes just sort of snap into this mode and wax lyrical about these things. But to the outside world, no one, like for instance the people at church, no one knew anything about her beliefs. She presented as a quote-unquote normal Christian woman, and this is radically not Christian. Very much breaks with conventional orthodoxy, let's say. But it was really a hothouse of myths and expectations, and, you know, even the length that she would go to siphon out reality was pretty incredible. I remember us discussing whether our mum had a mental illness, whether she was going through a psychotic break or something like that. Looking back now, I sort of think, why didn't we reach out to someone about that? But years later, with Mum still being alive and no longer talking so much about this, and of course this is post-1992 when the Second Coming did not happen and there was no return in a fleet headed by the Foxfire, I guess it became less and less tenable as an idea. She did sometimes claim such mystical beliefs, and avowedly believed in life beyond this planet. But when I left Perth, was actually in the year 1992, so It's interesting, isn't it? Like, one son's supposed to return and another one leaves. And I just was, I was shell-shocked from so many things in my family, but I felt that I had, in the post-divorce years, sort of been immersed in a cult beliefs. Uh, this compartmentalization and dissociation that she exhibited as well, the inability to grieve, the sanctioning of our own emotions was fundamental to the kind of root system, I guess, of this kind of mythologization post my brother's death. But the seeds were planted before that, and it's almost like retrospectively she would use or make claims of evidence to back up her position. How do you explain this? How do you explain this kind of otherworldliness and this reaching for something beyond? I've thought about this even from my mother's death. She was a very gentle creature for the most part, and small and kind of elfin-like in some ways. I think personally that it's the result of trauma, of what she suffered in her family life, and also as a young woman. I'm not going to go into those details, but sometimes these sorts of, whether you want to call them psychotic breaks or breaks from reality, occur because of something that's too unbearable. And obviously the loss of your son is part of that, but there were other losses, there were other traumas even before I was born. For so long I tried to understand her, but I never challenged these things. And in hindsight, I kind of think maybe that was appropriate, because we know that people with like schizoaffective disorder, for example, who have delusions, the first line of response is not to say, you know, what you're experiencing isn't real. You're not supposed to play it up, but you're supposed to listen and say, oh, okay, how does that affect you? And, you know, that must be difficult. Or how do you feel about these things? You're not there to challenge their delusion or negate them, because that can actually make them spiral. So I guess it's how she weathered the storms of life. But by doing so, she also brought us as young people into a system of denial and a lack of grieving, and a sort of fantastical story that didn't match reality, leaving aside the possibility that there are forms of extraterrestrial and intelligent life, and even visitations, to have that then woven into a family account that is distorting, that actually affects a growing person's worldview, is questionable. I read a book called Tastes Like War, and it's about a Korean American woman and her responding to and finding a diagnosis to her mother as she began to develop delusions in her 40s. And she eventually received a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And that book makes very clear that so much had happened in her mother's life during the Korean War that would account for, you know, environmental kinds of contexts of the generation of mental health disorders lying in trauma. I can't diagnose my mother decades hence, I don't know what the word is, but I can say that it was extremely weird, and it was kind of like a in-house knowledge. Things that if we mentioned them to outsiders, they'd say that can't be real. Your mum can't believe in this. You must be making it up. She's not like that. I've met her. She's the sweetest woman. But it's kind of a spit reality that we lived through. and it created a lot of fear and apprehension. I found it hard to look at things in any other way except through my mother's kind of invented theology. I try to trace out some of that in the figure of Mira and her grandiosity in positioning herself as a reincarnation of Nefertiti, the ancient Egyptian queen, and also, paradoxically, Mary Magdalene. It's very interesting that in the New Age movement, when people propound that they're reincarnations, they're not ordinary people. They're always these grand historical figures, and how can so many people be a reincarnation of either of those two? I think my mother just suffered so much she couldn't bear looking reality in the face, including the violence of her husband and the death of her son. I think that all of those things just came thick and fast, and she fell under not just physical but also psychic assault. But the legacy is that she kind of imprinted that on our young minds, and I've never had a resolution on these things. Clearly it's an ability to be very creative, and it's something that I can tap into myself, but like, I don't believe in those things, and I, for the most part, don't even believe in mainstream religion. One thing is to be searching for meaning, and another thing is to create a whole confabulation which covers up reality, avoids it. And, you know, for example, when my mum burnt my brother's death certificate, trying to destroy traces of fact. It's a painful thing to recount, but it is just because I want to put it out there, and it is often quite isolating because I don't know anyone else who ever went through these sorts of fantasias with one parent or another behind closed doors. If you find the story interesting or you want to find out more, please comment below. There's definitely more. Council of the 12 much?